In the shadow of a brewing geopolitical storm, the United States stood upon a precipice of ambition and nuclear rivalry. President Kennedy's mandate demanded more than mere exploration. It required a definitive answer from beyond the heavens to settle a question dividing nations. This imperative drove the creation of the Saturn V, a colossus 100 feet tall, of metal and fire designed to defy gravity itself. On July 16th, beneath the Florida sky at 1332 IDC, the third stage engine ignited, shaking the Earth with a roar that echoed across the Atlantic. Inside the capsule, 3 men stood ready for their final voyage: Commander Neil Armstrong, Command Module Pilot Michael Collins, and Lunar Module Pilot Edwin Aldrin. All 3 astronauts were on their second and final spaceflight. The spacecraft was a complex marriage of command, service, and lunar modules, each stage vital to the mission's success. As the rocket climbed through the atmosphere, leaving the clouds behind, they carried the weight of a nation's promise on their shoulders toward the Sea of Tranquility. It was not merely a flight. It was a declaration that humanity could reach for the stars and walk upon them. The journey had begun, and the silence of space awaited those who sought to bridge the gap between Earth and the Moon forever. Above the Earth, the Saturn V had cast its shadow into history. Inside the command module Columbia, Michael Collins sat quietly in a sphere of silence while his colleagues prepared to sever their tether to humanity's past. Below him, the lunar module Eagle descended toward the Sea of Tranquility, leaving 1 man watching from the highest point. The spacecraft was a triad of steel and fire, now a duet of separation. Collins remained in orbit, a solitary sentinel guarding the ascent stage. He knew that down there, Neil Armstrong would become the first man to walk on another world, stepping onto dust that had never known a footprint. Buzz Aldrin followed 19 minutes later, and together they spent 2.5 hours wandering a landscape of infinite stillness. But up here, the silence was absolute. There were no voices from below, no static from the ground, only the hum of life support systems keeping him alive in the cold void. He watched the descent engine ignite, a flare of light against the black backdrop. He was the ghost of the mission, watching his companions touch the moon's face. This was the lonely heart of Apollo 11th, where 1 man stayed behind to witness the beginning of history from above, waiting for the liftoff that would bring them home again. July 20th, 1969. The Saturn V rocket had delivered its payload into the void, launching atop a massive column of fire on the 16th. Now the true test begins within the Eagle. Commander Neil Armstrong and Lunar Module Pilot Edwin Aldrin sit in the cockpit of the descent stage, while Michael Collins remains alone in orbit aboard the Columbia. Outside their viewport, the Sea of Tranquility waits, silent and indifferent to human ambition. Dust billows from the lunar regolith as they approach the surface, obscuring the sensors that guide them home. Every second burns precious fuel. The computer warns of impending abort conditions. Armstrong must trust his own eyes against the machine's palpable panic. He guides the craft gently into the darkness of the landing site. At 2117 UTC, the Eagle settles onto the gray dust. Absolute silence falls over the capsule as Collins waits in lunar orbit for their return. 6 hours later, Armstrong becomes the first human to walk upon another world. 19 minutes after him, Aldrin follows his commander across the cratered landscape. Together they spend 2.5 hours exploring the desolate beauty of the moon, leaving footprints that will endure longer than civilization itself. The perilous descent is finally over. The history has been written in gray stone beneath their worn boots. Above the Sea of Tranquility, descent engines cut out completely, leaving 2 men standing upon a surface untouched for 4 billion years. Neil Armstrong pushes open the hatch, stepping onto gray regolith with caution that belies the magnitude of his historic action. Beside him, Edwin Aldrin follows closely, boots crushing ancient dust into silence. They walk for 2.5 hours carefully across a landscape where light travels in seconds but history weighs in tons. Together, they gathered 21.5 kilograms of lunar material, each rock and pebble a fragment of a world far older than human memory. The atmosphere is thin, yet the silence is profound, unbroken by wind or sound from home. Michael Collins orbits alone above them in the Columbia, watching as Armstrong and Aldrin collect samples defining geology forever. Time stretches here differently, measured not by clocks but by the sphere's slow rotation within the void. They are the first humans to witness this stillness with their own eyes, leaving footprints behind them on the surface before ascent begins. It is a moment where science meets spirit, and for 90 minutes after Armstrong, the Earth appears as merely a blue dot viewed through the window of the Eagle. The silence remains heavy, a physical weight carried by two figures against the infinite black sky. From the silent dust of the Sea of Tranquility, the ascent stage ignites, severing its tether to the moon's gravity. Armstrong and Aldrin are lifted upward, leaving their boots behind in the regolith, while Collins holds station in the Columbia Command Module orbiting above. They return through the void that once seemed unreachable. The descent stage is jettisoned into the dark, a final act of separation before the fiery plunge toward Earth begins. Re-entry demands absolute precision. Friction turns their hull into an oven before cooling them safely over the Atlantic Ocean. This ascent completes the fifth crewed mission of NASA's Apollo program. Launched atop a Saturn V rocket from Kennedy Space Center in Florida on July 16 at 1332 UTC, this journey fulfilled the national goal set in May 1961. All three astronauts were on their second and final spaceflight, having walked upon another world together for 2.5 hours. Armstrong became the first human to walk on the moon, approximately 6 hours after landing. Aldrin stepped onto the surface 19 minutes later. Now they return to humanity, carrying the weight of history in their memory. The impossible has been achieved through courage and precision, proving that we can reach for the stars and come back alive. They have safely returned to Earth, ending the decade-long quest.